G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Christie David, and if you don't know me, I run a mortgage broking business called Atelier Wealth, where we help property investors start out and scale up their portfolios. As part of any investor's journey, it's talking to people who have been there, done that, or what I call who are best in breed. So these are thought leaders in our industry, people that are giving back, people that are trying to see investors do well and prosper. And quite often that comes from a place of their heart's in the right place and they want to reach more investors. And today is someone that's very, very knowledgeable about not only the property investment market, data, but also kind of what goes on behind the scenes from a media and a communications perspective as well, having run one of the big titles in this space as well. If you don't know Ripehouse Advisory, you're probably not on YouTube. Jacob has an incredible presence on there. Jacob Field, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me, Aaron. It's an absolute pleasure and a privilege. And I've been looking forward to it, even though I've come down with a cold today in the last 24 hours. So I might not be my bubbly self. I'll push through.
Mate, push through, you shall. And I really appreciate you showing up the way that you do, honouring a commitment and doing what you're doing. So it can knock you about, right? Just even if it's we call it a little cold, but mate, it messes with your head and don't show up how you want to sometimes, mate. So thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. I wouldn't have missed it. I was really looking forward to coming on and having a conversation about property, but then also obviously with your finance and strategy background, that's a common issue that I see a lot today is finance. This is a game of finance that we play. So picking your brain, maybe sort of comparing notes in a few ways. I think I'm really looking forward to it. So
beautiful. I just want to start chat by saying this is general in nature and not intended to give advice. So if you do need advice, please seek out a qualified expert, pay for that advice and find the right person that's going to suit your needs as well. Yeah. So like I mentioned, Jacob Field runs a business called Ripehouse Advisory, and we'll talk a little bit more later about what Ripehouse stands for and what they do. But Jacob has, we're talking about years of skin in the game for investing in property. You've built your own portfolio, for example, but you've also had the privilege of running Australian Property Investor magazine, which I think is a very unique perspective because you kind of reported on what was going on the ground. That was an incredible title that really, I guess, fueled investors seeking out that knowledge as well. The amount of info that used to be in the back pages with every property, every suburb, that's a beast to be managing as well, mate. So well done to you. And really now your iteration is helping property investors build and grow quality portfolios, mate.
Yeah, it is. Would you like me to give a little bit of background about how those things come together? Because connecting those dots is sometimes important, Aaron, and giving a little bit of context behind it. But I do blabber on a little bit about myself. So hopefully
it's what I call the
indulge me.
So 3 Ps are a bit about yourself, personally, professionally, and property. And I think you kind of can touch across all 3.
Yeah. Look, I'm from Tasmania originally, and I'm calling in today from Coles Bay up here on the East Coast. A beautiful part of the world, but, it is a smaller island and a smaller place. So as a lot of Tasmanians did, mid-20s, we're all jumping on a boat or jumping on a plane and escaping to the mainland, we called it. I've got 2 beautiful children with my wife, Anna, a 10 and a 7-year-old, and they're not in and around property yet. I'm trying to start.
Not yet.
One day. I guess, I think now as sort of time goes on and I'm getting older, I used to be very sporty, but I spend a lot of time with my children now and seeing them grow and develop, it's really wonderful to do. So, look, for me, down here in Tassie, things, I guess they're a little bit tough to start with. I was living with my dad and he was on the sole parent pension and we didn't have a huge amount to go around. So from a probably early age, I had this focus on changing our lot in life or, pulling ourselves out of where we were. And it probably wasn't really normal for a 10 or a 12-year-old to be sort of focusing and doing the things that I was doing. But really, I wanted to try and look for a different way, not be reliant, obviously, on the pension, as Dad was. So, things like Jan Summers, More Wealth from Residential Property, was a book that I read when I was sort of 14 or 15 of my own volition. And it really sort of turned my eyes towards how property investment could work. and how we could use other people's money. And I think that was the big aha moment for me. So property investment was the means that I used to start investing, and there were a few false starts. I bought my first investment property when I was 21 down here in Tasmania. It probably would have been earlier if it wasn't for Dad, who, Dad on the sole parent pension had a real sort of aversion to risk. So he talked me out of, getting a loan of any type. And I didn't buy a property when I turned 18. I actually bought a sports car in from Japan without seeing it, which he didn't think was as risky somehow. So that came out here, and I couldn't insure the car. And so I thought, well, I'm not listening to you again, Dad. I sold the car and bought a property. It did really well for us. I think, as luck would have it, down here in Hobart, around that sort of 2005, 2004, we had some pretty crazy capital growth, similar times to what it is now. And I thought, well, this is working well. Bought another property soon after. And then I lost my way a little bit, Aaron, to tell you the truth. I was sort of in my early to mid-20s, so I was burning the candle at both ends, at uni, spending a lot of time with friends and things as you do. And I lost sight of things. I thought, I've achieved what I wanted to do. I've got 2 investment properties now. I've ticked all these boxes, and I've started living the life too early, I guess. And reality gave me a kick up the bum. I guess it wasn't until I met Anna when I was 25, 26, when she really sort of brought that focus back into things for us. She convinced me to move to the mainland, to move to Sydney. I wanted to continue to investing. We both moved into jobs there. And we wanted to continue investing. And I went and had a look at some properties, had some friends in property that I'd met online, quite well-known people, I guess, in the industry now. And they told me Mount Druitt, Western Suburbs, went out to Mount Druitt and completely lost my confidence, Aaron. It really did throw me, and it wasn't really like what I'd seen down here in Hobart in terms of investing. And that's where I went to, probably back to where I knew, and what I knew best is software engineering, research, data. Dad bought me a computer. That's really all he spent our money on when I was younger, on a computer. That's what he was into. So I had a computer, but we didn't really have much else. So I've always been into software engineering and programming, and I went back to that. That's how I got my confidence back. After being thrown a little bit, moving to Sydney and seeing what was around. And it wasn't another 2 years before Anna and I purchased our next property. It was up towards the Maitland area. And that was a full process. We'd go out to breakfast and lunch every day to a different suburb on the weekends for 2 years, getting to know, I guess, how people lived, why they lived there, why they paid what they did. And then I went back and looked at the data for the rest of the week and tried to find those matches. And that's when the algorithms and things started, the first evolution of it. Obviously went on to buy again, and I'm aware of time, Aaron. I'll keep it short.
That's all right, mate. Keep going.
Went on to buy again. We did develop a portfolio across the country. We went into many different strategies without really a reason to. So there's a lot of mistakes along the way, which I'd love to talk you through. That's probably the key learnings. And then property investment, it did really work for us. Finance was a very different game for us back then when we were buying. So with our incomes and things, we could essentially just keep buying as quickly as we had the deposits, which were quite low. You didn't need a 20% deposit in a lot of cases then. So we continued buying. We got to the point where we were 30, early 30s, and we were able to leave our jobs. We were able to move back down here to Tassie to be closer to grandchildren after we'd had our first child, and to change things there. We were sort of living in middle Sydney in Lane Cove area, and it was a great area, but it was difficult to get out and do things on the weekend. So we wanted to make those lifestyle changes. Along the way, property allowed me, the positive impact of property, it allowed me to have those, make those decisions and to take that time away from a job and not be reliant on it. And it also then gave us the time to turn that framework, what I was been working on, to buy our own properties, into software that other people could use. So 2011 was the first year that we actually released our software and research to others. And then since then, I've obviously been a professional in the industry and working with others. Some of the highlights though, 2016, 2017, I was lucky enough to buy Australian Property Investor magazine. That's a magazine that I did grow up reading. It was a privilege to, as you say, I'd sort of rushed out of the news agency in those days and have you got it in? Have you got it in? And you'd rush away to a cafe and read it, and you'd turn to the back of the books and see how much money you'd made last month. And, in terms of the suburb growth, that was really the only source of it, wasn't it, Aaron? data in other places. It was in the back of the magazines, and it was a true privilege to be able to take that magazine on and course correct. They were too slow potentially going into the tech space. There were some opportunities there. They were very, I guess, old school in how the business was structured. And the problem I saw with the industry, Aaron, it still exists to a certain degree, is it's pay for play. If you pay the most for advertising, you'll get the most airtime in these magazines. So we made a meritocracy. We basically threw the keys back to the authors. The faster the articles were liked or shared, then would show them more airtime. A pay-for-play article might get 100 views, or it might get 10,000 in the space of a week or so.
Yeah.
And that really worked. Traffic went through the roof. We built it back up again into an online publication, and then I was tapped on the shoulder by a Singaporean company to actually purchase it about 18 months later.
Wow.
They had plans to obviously come back into Australia. They weren't well known here as a brand, and they wanted to have API in their stable. So that was a good sort of transition, and back into Ripehouse Advisory, which has been the commonality. It does bring together my software background, research background, property, and then working with other investors is what sort of makes it worthwhile. Seeing the results and how you can actually change people's trajectories is very rewarding. So I think that's full circle, Aaron. I've done a lot of talking.
Yeah, I think
you haven't fallen asleep, so it's good.
No, I want to continue that because you mentioned a couple of things, and one is you learned a lot going through your journey as an investor yourself. Get me through. There's obviously the wins where properties have performed and you've been able to leverage and then go again. But I find that a lot of us learn from what didn't work as well. So learn from my mistakes is something that I say a lot to people. What was some of the now learnings, but at the time, maybe mistakes that you made as well, Jacob?
Well, if only we could learn from other people's mistakes, that would be that would be really good. So I can tell you about what we did, but it's probably not going to stop many people from making the same mistakes again. So I'll talk about my mistakes, but then I'll talk about potentially the strategy of how we can stop doing it, which I see very common in the industry. I am very close to in the different channels and the different businesses that I'm involved in. I am very close to investors, and I take a lot of pride in that.
Yeah.
So I see the issues. I see the same things that people are knocking their head up against the wall with, day in and day out. But, at a high level, we've had a conversation in the past, Aaron, where I see finance. This is a game of finance, and particularly important right now, as opposed to when I was buying a lot of my properties, where they didn't have serviceability rates in the same way or DTI ratios in the same way. That's probably the big one. APRA wasn't. I didn't even hear of APRA until sort of 8 years ago or whenever it was. Think of things that we're trying to get as much forward progression towards our goals as possible. We're here and we want to get to the future. We want to get and achieve our goals. And that could be an equity goal or a cash flow goal. The more we go to the left and the right, the slower our forward progression is. We're not taking the path of least resistance. So, I made mistakes where what I mean by the left and the right is you go too far over to the left here, you might be chasing cash flow in a deal. You might be chasing this regional property that doesn't grow in value, or a mining town that goes bust, or a commercial asset that has great incomes but not particularly the growth. If you go too far to that left, the banks love you. They love your servicing, they love your income, but you're not saving those deposits up, so it might slow that forward progression. So on that left-hand side, I made a few mistakes. I went into regionals, back of the magazine once again. My data was telling me all these wonderful things. Went into places like Dubbo. And when I went into Dubbo, I didn't buy where I should have bought in potentially the middle to upper socio areas in a small town. I bought the lower socio, chasing the yields and hoping it would turn around. So, buying residential properties with 10 or 12% yield on purchase, and then, the streets that they were in brought with it their own socio issues, their own problems with residents and neighbours. And I guess it caused a lot of stress in our portfolio. When you're managing a portfolio, and I don't need to go into details, but you're managing a number of these properties in your portfolio. When you get these phone calls, they start happening more and more often when you go into these types of places where the numbers might be good, but the emotional stability or the stress associated with them just does not justify it. So we'd get phone calls, or one in particular on a Sunday afternoon, and it was from the Dubbo area code. And my heart sank when I got the phone call, because I knew something was wrong. And, thankfully, it's a very unfortunate situation, but thankfully it wasn't our property, but the next door neighbour's property had burnt down. They didn't know who had done it. And this was happening all in and around. So you can go after, cash flow, but then it's at the expense sometimes of growth. We have pretty standardised minimum rentals in Australia, and I don't say this in the wrong way, because of, social housing and social assistance and pensions and things like that. So we have a floor in rentals, but values can really drop through the floor. And if there's no value growth there, then values stay low for a long time. The yields might be attractive, but it brings with it a whole other raft of issues. So that was one of the mistakes there. Probably on the other side of the equation.
Just on that point, nothing frustrates an investor more than having the ability to borrow but not having the equity or the cash to then go. It's one of the ultimate frustrations, is what I see, especially from a finance perspective. They've got the means, they've got the borrowing capacity, they've got the want, but now they just don't have the equity or the cash to then go again. It stifles their growth, doesn't it?
And it's frustrating, and it's especially for me when I was really trying to get ahead. It was very frustrating, and you bury yourself into a hole where you're beholden to your portfolio. It becomes a noose around your neck, and you sit there day after day thinking, well, hang on, how can I take course corrective action? How can I get back towards the middle? That wasn't even the start of it. I'll do things as well, Aaron, where we'd buy properties within sort of 2 or 3 hours of Sydney, which is where we're living. We'd knock off work at lunchtime on a Friday to go to IKEA to pick up a full kitchen on the back of a trailer, drive, put the kitchen in over a weekend and get back to work on a Monday. So we'd be doing these things where we're refining this strategy. We're testing around the edges what was working and what wasn't. And we worked out there has to be certain criteria with the population centre, not rural. There had to be a certain diversity. There had to be a certain proximity to a larger population centre. And then value adding was when it started really clicking for us. Buying properties and hoping, or buying properties that had little opportunity to value add. That's what gets you out the back door, being able to take those short circuits, potentially finding good yielding properties, value adding, gets you back over to the deposit for the next one. That kitchen, by the way, from IKEA, I put that on a credit card, like literally paid for the kitchen on a credit card, put it in myself. And then as soon as I could, refinanced, paid the credit card off, and then accessed the equity to go again. That was the game. Probably went too far over to the other side. So I was a rent investor, is the term these days. It wasn't until our sixth property that we purchased that we actually live in. So we were living the lifestyle that we wanted without children. We were in sort of the Darlinghurst, Rushcutters Bay area of Sydney, and investing in the areas across the country that were giving us the returns that we wanted, right? Which were other areas, and I can talk more on that as a science, I guess, in a moment. But went too far the other direction. Buying too early in the Sydney market without the yield there. It was great for the equity production. It was great for the deposits. Going too far over to the right, though, we didn't have the income attached to those investments, and the banks said no, thank you. That's enough. So we. Staying that course correct, I'll be sort of oscillating between over here. Bought another site that was a development site, which looked great on paper. But then development sites, you're paying for a lot of land that doesn't have a yield attached to it, doesn't have an income attached to it. So the yield on that then was another noose around my neck for a couple of years. So, I've sort of done a few different things, but it was always a battle of that left and right. And so I guess as an evolution of that, the properties that I've focused on in the last few years, and particularly with clients, having a very clear purpose for why we're buying them, what we're actually trying to achieve from this property, and having that awareness of, is this income at the expense of deposits or equity production at the expense of income, and what are the costs associated with those trade-offs? That's probably the learning.
Mate, well said. And you're spot on. The strategy then meets the finance strategy, meets what the goal is to buy the next property, build a portfolio. And exactly what you said about being a rent investor, I feel like rent investing has its place up until the point that you get married or you want to put down roots, for example, which is have a family, then have that stability. And I feel like that's where the topic of rent investing probably has its place to go. It's great and it'll get you to a certain point, but what happens at this next stage? And I feel like a lot of people have been on the rent investing journey up until now, where they've maybe grown up a little bit more, going, now we're thinking about family or having kids. And it's like, we actually want to buy our own place. and it's got them to here, but it won't get them to there.
Yeah, and even when they do that, though, I have a very separate strategy for principal place of residences. It's buying really low into a very blue chip market and doing, overcapitalizing. It might sound crazy, but you can't really overcapitalize on a core owner-occupier led asset in a very blue chip market, and you don't pay capital gains tax on that. So even personally in the owner-occupier space, I have a different strategy where the rules are off the table, and Hobart's a smaller place, so it's not like Sydney where you're sort of moving from one suburb to the next and aspirational suburbs. Now it's almost in Hobart, like street to street. But buying that unrenovated home and then putting the crazy bedrooms on there, putting the pool in there, and then, targeting an owner-occupier buyer, starting again, moving through the ladder that way in the owner-occupier space is something that's an entirely different strategy. But yeah.
Perfect, mate. Let's look through the lens of Ripehouse Advisory, right? And I want you to, in your own words, explain what the premise is behind it, what people get when they come to Ripehouse, and how you've been able to help investors as well.
It's a good question, and probably just pulling back a little bit. So I left my job. The software had been there in the background, right? So I was always tinkering away. Even while I was working, my heart was somewhere else. So developing the software over 18 or so months before I left the job, and then decided to give it a go full time, in between kids and babies and things. So Ripehouse as a software started as a software and as a service. It was, you come onto the website and you pay money, $97 a month to use the subscription. About 2015, 2016, I was thinking, wow, this is doing great. A lot of people were contacting us and saying, thank you, I couldn't have bought this property without you. The research is excellent.
Wonderful. So
I took a bit of a deep dive. I'm not saying that in a positive way. There's a point to that. We took a deep dive into the actual properties that people were purchasing. And, we had over 1,000 people who were using the software at that point, Aaron. And I was thinking, this is great. This is really working. But it was 2/3 of the properties people were buying in a research-assisted fashion were incorrect, right? So you'd say, hey, go and buy here in Sunshine Coast in Warana, and they'd think close enough is good enough and just go next door and buy in the Stocklands estate, or they'd buy a unit there near the beach thinking it's all they could afford, they've got the suburb right, or they might buy just around the corner of the sweet spot in the area and there's a bit too much public housing there, or they might not negotiate effectively. So that audit of many purchases where the investor had thought, hey, I've done this great job, where when you look at it from a professional lens, there were compromises to it, caused concern. Anna and I were looking at it going, do we continue evolving this software? Do we continue to improve upon it? Or is literally the packaging of this research just entirely incorrect? So we started investigations with other buyers agents, other professionals in the industry, so people you pay as an investor to do the research and to find properties for you. That led to a whole other raft of problems, I guess, where I didn't want to empower a buyer's agent who was just focused on their local turf. I truly believed in buyer's agents being borderless. You find buyer's agents, if they're sitting there on the North Shore of Sydney, they're only going to recommend the North Shore of Sydney as an investment, where someone who's a little bit too far to the right wants some, needs income, they might not be the best investment place for them at the moment. So there's a bias there with buyer's agents in some cases. So I didn't want to perpetuate that bias. So what we looked at doing was providing a layer of research and due diligence to other buyer's agents. That was really successful. We went through to COVID. Essentially, we had over 70 buyer's agents in the country that had outsourced their research due diligence. Their client would walk in the door in Sydney, they'd take the brief from the client, and then behind the scenes, they would outsource the property selection, the due diligence, the individual areas to us, and then would even do in our own reporting, which was fully white label to the business. They'd click a button, they'd get it all, and would even start negotiating, would talk to the agents. We were making hundreds of phone calls a day, talking to real estate agents, and that was working. Well, for me to see if it's working from a data perspective is the research or the value of that research passed across to the investor, and how often is that passed across? If it's 90%, 95%, great. If it's 30%, not good enough. And that model was working. at one point as well, we were buying a lot of properties. I did the numbers going into COVID, and it was over 1% of every dwelling purchased in Australia. We were responsible for actually selecting and then passing it to the buyer's agent. It was crazy, the number of properties we were buying, and it really did allow us to throw our weight around when we're coming into markets. We had a tremendous amount of leverage. But what we gave these buyer's agent businesses was scale. Would have a couple, two of them in a business, and they might be working on 30 clients a month, based on us being able to do that for them. And it was working. But then COVID happened, and I'm going into another long story, Aaron, but COVID happened very quickly. The buyer's agents didn't need scale. They didn't have clients knocking on the door. They didn't need our services. We looked at what was working, what wasn't working. And then once again, there are a lot of very junior buyers agents in the industry. We had a couple of them, use our services with their first clients. And then when they were making offers, they actually asked us to help them fill in the purchase contract because they'd never done it before, right? Yeah. And so we were thinking, hang on a second, what are we actually doing again? So that caused me to go back to, is the research being protected and the results from that research being passed over to the investor? And at that point, coming out of COVID, we made the decision to work directly with clients. And it is we don't try and solve problems in a traditional way. There's over 40 people in the business now, and we have a separate research department. We have a separate due diligence department, and we have a separate client management or buyer's agent department who are doing the negotiations. And so that's the final completion of the circle. It's working more in a direct fashion. We still work with a few buyer's agents, some of the good guys, but otherwise we have to keep the research very close to our chest. So, I
love the fact that you've been quite protective of the tool and making sure it's being used in the right direction, as opposed to going mainstream or commercial and just going right, commoditize it, as opposed to let's protect our IP and make sure it's actually going to the right hands and being used correctly as well. So it's quite a genuine type approach, isn't it?
Look, you have to and it's actually an issue that I'm seeing in a major way at the moment, and it's becoming. People are not really stopping to think, and I'm not saying this in a way of judging, but I'm saying this in my observations. People are very quick to latch onto a suburb recommendation. At the moment, people might be recommending Toowoomba. Yeah. So they're very quick to go Toowoomba. If you guys are talking about it, I'm going to jump out and I'm going to go there. Right. So I call that, public advisory or public sources of information, and it's the masses, right? There's a lot of people diving over that data. I'll give you a little bit of an idea of the other side of the equation, because for me, the data and the research is worth more to less people, or it's worth less to more people. If you're the first into a market and there's going to be quite a few people following you, then, you'll be buying all the development sites, you'll be, buying some commercial dwellings, and you're getting, getting all the best deals. The second person, the second best deals, and so on up through the tree. And this is something that I really grasped with owning Australian Property Investor magazine. One of the reasons why I actually bought that was because I was in control of the public advisory to a certain degree in the industry. We do this now, and we did it in Toowoomba. We bought 120 properties in Toowoomba last year, and we don't rely on external sources of research. If it's in a research report, we almost might not buy there. If it's talked about in an education course or a company or a score or whatever it might be, it means that it's probably too late for us. When you get in first and you don't rely on any of those sources of research, you're able to get the best deals. And the more people who know about that information, then the less the quality of the deals. You start having people offer over offer scenarios. Yeah, it's scary because it's close enough is not good enough. And it's particularly in times like this, an entry point that might be 5 or 7% above what someone has purchased there 2 or 3 months before. That's the difference between actually having equity in your property in a year's time or not. We're hitting the top of the cycle potentially in a macro space. So we can't just think close enough is good enough and I'll pick the area that's fine, thanks. I'll get off my high horse.
Let's stay there, because one of my other questions I've got for you is, this is typically what happens. I've heard it from a YouTube video. I've heard it from media reports. And we'll pick on Toowoomba for no real reason, but you just mentioned it. Yeah. So I've heard it a couple of times. And then it's now you're looking for all the reasons to buy there, and it's what I call a confirmation bias, and you'd be very aware of that. So it's like it alters our perspective, going, oh, okay, so this is the space to be buying in, and now you're looking for all the reasons to be buying there, as opposed to maybe you're overlooking the reasons why it may be overheated or hasn't got the right yields, for example, but you insist on this is the area for me. So take me through, how have you seen, or how have you been able to combat confirmation bias, or how do you address that even with your own buyers that you're advising as well, Jacob?
As a business, we don't ever talk about the locations we're buying in. So a client would come to us and they're like, let's have a chat. I love what you do. Can you talk to me about some of the locations we're buying in? No, we can't. We can give you maybe Queensland or WA. We can't really dig in any deeper than that, because we have to lock that information down as tightly as possible. And I'll give you an idea of how well coordinated this needs to be. And I have a bit of a case study. It only takes a minute or so, but going into COVID, when we were buying properties for clients and for clients of clients, we had a lot of leverage, right? So we identified Devonport in Tasmania, 25,000 people live there. The data was absolutely ringing off the bell was the ding, ding, ding. This is right in the buying window for us as a company. It was showing all the signs, right? We'd done our due diligence. We'd been on the ground. We'd looked around it. There were 110 properties on the market. We went on a deep dive of those properties. We made many phone calls to the agents, because if they knew that professionals were interested in the market, they would change the way that they would think. They'd talk to their principal at their office and say, I've just had this interesting call from someone on the mainland, and they'll change the way they position properties. So I'd have very low sophistication. I actually had people in the Philippines, believe it or not, making hundreds of phone calls to the real estate agents in Devonport over 2 or 3 week period. They might make 6 phone calls. I'd ring up and think, pretend they don't even really know what's going on, but they'll get critical information about the tenant's vendor sales agent relationship, and if there was been access to the open homes or not. Stuff like that you have to get right into the weeds with. We gathered all of this intelligence. We identified 40 or so properties that were our targets. We then had very coordinated negotiations on those 40. So I'm talking over the period of a week or so, we came in with very targeted professional negotiations. 3 or 4, so 3-bedroom homes in Devonport as a market were selling for around that $300,000 price point. We bought, I don't have the information. So 20 properties, we bought 20 properties in 3 weeks in Devonport. So of those 40 or so properties we shortlisted, we acquired 20 of them instantly. We dragged the market down to us because they were pretty local real estate agents. They didn't really know the ways of the wider world. And we were professional negotiators. We came in and had a field day. We dragged those 20 properties down to 270 to 280,000. And then what happened? Well, guess what? The data in this market, it was a very good market overall. There was lots of buyer activity overall, lots of open homes, et cetera, et cetera. So with 20 less properties out of the market in 2 or 3 weeks, we had people piling into those ones that were left over. Now, you would know this from a finance perspective as well, Aaron. If we kept buying there as professionals, we would suck the market down to us. As soon as our purchases become comparables, as soon as they settle and become comparables, that's the new normal. We've actually lowered the values in the area. But when we strategically come in and out, we've left the market. People, mums and dads are going to the open homes. There's less properties around. They go back to the bank. They get a vow done. None of ours is coming up on the vow reports. They then go happily along and offer 300, 310, 320. And the moment they do, it sucks up all of our comparables to that number. Yeah. And we did it en masse, right? And this gives you some idea. The moment we'd stopped buying there, with Australian Property Investor magazine and those types of connections and things, talk about Devonport. Guess what, guys? Devonport. We've been, all these wonderful things occurring in Devonport. Investors should take note. I called the local real estate agents, the local newspaper, and I was on the front page of the newspaper, $6 million worth of property bought by the mainlanders, right? So as soon as we stop buying there as private advisory, we start the news cycle going, right? It's like a hedge fund, or it's like a professional, it's sophisticated investment. You use the information cycle to your advantage. We've done that again. We've tried it on, cities now 10 times the size. We've done it on sort of full suburbs through, we're in Salisbury, local government area of Salisbury, and we did the same thing there in 2020. Bought many properties very quickly and then spread the news cycle. So, when people are sometimes talking about areas publicly, it's the motivations might be, somewhat hidden, and it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just I'm buying there as well. My clients are buying there, so it's in our interest for property prices to go up, and for vacancy rates to tighten. So,
just for example, and this is one of the questions I've got for you, is there are properties, so there are 40 properties in Devonport, for example, but you bought 20 of them. So what made 20 make the cut and 20 not make the cut from your professional experience?
I've got a framework that we use, and I call it the push property framework. So, it's another one of those acronyms, but the P stands for purchasing under market value. This is a can of worms. Under market value truly does exist if you have a very accurate picture of value, and then you can negotiate under it. So targeting these properties where we have profit on the entry is important. I want to be making money out of the purchase and not the vendor. Uplifting the property in value through renovation. So over the years, with my properties on the back of kitchens on the back of a trailer on the way up to Newcastle area, I know the stuff that you do to a property that improves the value of it cheaply. And you have to think of things in terms of a ratio. So if you're fixing leaky roofs or you've got structural issues, you might get a 1-for-1 return on your money spent. You might spend 15 grand on stumping, but it's only really adding what you paid for that stumping work. Yeah. If you do things like floating floorboards, painting walls, you've got a 3 or 4 times multiple in many cases, tidying up landscaping, simple stuff like that. Yeah. Kitchens, bathrooms, usually between 2 and 3. Obviously, COVID squeezed a lot of margin through this, but finding properties where have that uplift potential, staying away from structural. So of those properties, it has to be the right level of tired. It can't be too well renovated or too new. It can't be too old that has those larger issues. That's a big part of it. And then you've got the synergies now starting to occur. So you might have more of an opportunity to purchase under market value with a property that's a little bit tired. Yeah. And the sales campaign may be a little bit compromised because the area is really going forth. You've got young families and they want something that's fresh and clean, right? So you've now got some leverage. And then you have this relationship where the S in push stands for surplus cash flow per annum, right? So we don't want to be negatively geared. We don't want to be foregoing $1 of profit so we can save 30 cents in tax. This is about a property earning the right to be in our portfolio. We're buying a business with a healthy balance sheet is what I sort of generally say. Yeah. So surplus cash flow is very important. When you renovate a property, you're then maximising the rent you can achieve from that property, and generally you up the gross on cost yield that you achieve from it. You have cash in the bank. So those three do work together quite well. And then the H stands for high performance growth. My expectation is I'm entering into a market where I've controlled those variables and I outperform the average. This is not, this is not advertising. It's not a sales pitch, but when you think of things and when you achieve the growth, right? If you wanted the best 100-year growth in Australia, you'd probably go to Point Piper or to Eastern Suburb City. They're worth $50 million for a reason, because they've had above average capital, compounding growth. Yeah. When you think about capital gains, and this is probably a really important takeaway, you have to think about when you would prefer the growth to occur. Is it on day 1 through to day, year 0 through to year 2, or is it from year 2 through to year 5, or is it, stronger compounding growth over the longer term? Because when I'm building a portfolio, I'm looking for high performance, short to mid-term growth, right? 0 to 5 years, I'm looking for areas that are really pushing forwards. And then if they fall back to the average, I'm okay with that. I've already made my above average returns. I can divest that into other things. So it's that awareness of when the return's occurring and demanding, because we are then picking our points in the cycle, we are demanding that we're entering into an upswing and not sitting around in a consolidation phase. So demanding that above average growth in the short term. That's what I look for, and then individual properties, I can run through a cheat sheet, but, as a team, and so it's a funny environment that we're operating at the moment where we're having to look at many, many properties and do due diligence on many, many properties for that due diligence to be wasted because, we don't have the leverage in a negotiation. We walk away with that wastage. So, we have to be very forceful with our checklists. We can't just go, it looks all good, but this one little point here is not going to work. So it's close enough is good enough. It has to be perfect. And there's some really easy ones probably to answer your question around generally rectangle shaped blocks, less gradient, less slope, noise, main roads, but then also Is the noise travelling from the main road? Are you one street away, but it's still impacted? We've had some interesting ones lately where banks getting a little bit funny with power lines. Some high voltage power lines over in WA are very different to what I'm used to here in Tassie. They actually look like traditional power lines, but they're extremely high voltage. So if you got to get a loan within 50 metres of those, you're going to have issues.
Yes.
There's a lot of gotchas like that that you probably got to tick the boxes. Maybe the one thing, just the one takeaway, is usable floor space. People paying extra and getting a 4-bedroom in the area, thinking that's going to hit the market between its eyes. But then, the bedrooms are all very small and there's only one large living area, where there's a 3-bedroom next door that has large bedrooms and 3 living areas. You don't need to pay a premium for that 4-bedroom when you can potentially come in and buy the 3-bedroom at a similar price or less, because it's a 3-bedder and it's perceived differently. Just that understanding of usable floor space. Is there a hallway right down the middle of the house and it's taking off each of the rooms and the size of them? Is there laundries? Some of these older constructs, are there laundries that are this? I saw one the other day that was 3.5 by about. It was over 3 by 3. It was 3.5 by 3.2 metre laundry. Like, you can turn that into a bedroom.
Exactly.
Yeah. So these sort of units, you've got to. These guys, to do this yourself, there's no shortcuts. Please, by all means, do it yourself. But you've got to literally look at hundreds and hundreds of properties and look at and think about things, digest it. Get a bottle of wine and actually think about what it's like to rent or live in these homes, and then you'll start to see what buying pools would see value for it. And you've got to think of it in terms of, if a property is compromised in its buying pool, like a duplex, right? A duplex, great yield, 2 entries, you've got 2 leases, excellent yield. But if you were ever to sell that duplex, it's only ever going to be an investor that would buy it. So then therefore you've got a whole raft of owner occupiers that wouldn't buy it. Your buying pool has been decreased. That's going to compromise your ongoing growth. Nice. Doing a lot of talking, guys.
That's why we wanted you on here. That's why we wanted you on here. That's probably why we're going to get you back, Jacob, is because it just kind of rolls off your tongue. So much knowledge. You want to see investors do well. Your heart's in the right place. And that's why I want to say thank you. Thank you for the way that you show up. And thank you. I know that you're not 100%. So thank you very much. And this is you not at 100%. We'll get you back when you're firing on all cylinders. That's why I want to say thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for Ripehouse and sharing your knowledge with us today. I really appreciate it. What we are going to do is, for anyone that wants to connect with Jacob, his team, and check out Ripehouse, we'll include all the details to his team and their website as well, so you can do your own due diligence, do your own research, and find out if it's the right fit for you and you on your portfolio building journey as well. But thank you very much, Jacob. We shall be in touch, and appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
That's a wrap for another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I've been your host, Aaron Christie David. Until next time, take care and we'll chat soon.